now I'm in the right place, in my little red box, ready to talk to you from here. And so it's quite nice to see people who've joined who I don't know. It's always lovely to introduce people to all the work that we do with dance and everything that we involved with here at Vita. So welcome, and I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you can invite your friends as well. Okay, so next time. So let's dive in now to the topic, psychedelics on dance. And my first comment to you is psychedelics food of the gods or food of the devil? And I just, it's a question because Terence McKenna, who wrote this book, Food of the Gods, maintained that this is the way we became human. In fact, that we trundled along for millions of years, and at some point we kind of stood up and we kind of became modern humans. But there was a turning point somewhere where, you know, suddenly from kind of fashioning stone axes and tools and kind of roaming the countryside or the savannah, so to speak, we said, you know, humans suddenly started making art and painting and creating things. And he puts it down to the fact that maybe this explosion of consciousness was facilitated by mushroom from his perspective. And then the devil I put there is not really the devil, but that's Albert Hofmann, who created LSD. And I just thought it was an interesting question to pose because of we have such associations around the term psychedelics and everything that goes with it, that, you know, we kind of need to make, let's call it rational excuses in our minds if we're going to even go down this path. And so, you know, it's got to be sacred, it's got to be of the gods, it's got to be this, it's got to be that, because lurking somewhere is this idea, you know, that you know, this is the devil luring me into corruption and a state of you know, whatever it is. And I just thought that, and what happened is, even, you know, when I put the word out for the talk today, I deliberately used the word psychedelics, which is a little bit more provocative than, you know, calling the plants medicine plants or sacred plants or something like that, because I kind of wanted not to be hiding behind this idea of, you know, like, you know, making things easy or kind of cushioning it for people. So here we go. And this is, so out of that arose this question. But here we are. And when I did send the invite out, I did get some really strange responses, which we won't go into, but it was obviously along the lines of people thinking that it's the devil incarnate now coming to speak via Zoom in their homes. Okay, so that's just a little intro. So I think the first thing I want to say, and I think, you know, it goes without saying, is that psychedelics are illegal in various parts of the world, various psychedelics in various countries, and that this talk is in no way intended to encourage anybody to act in an irresponsible manner. So I'm not here telling you to take psychedelics or to do anything that is illegal or irresponsible. But what's really interesting, having said that, is that there is this current research going on around the world by very, very established and mainstream institutions that are looking into the effects of psychedelics in therapeutic environments. And so I just thought it would be really nice to add to that discussion, to say, okay, people are doing research in terms of psychedelics, but how can the thing that we love most, which is to dance, make a contribution in this field? And this is what today was about. the talk is about. The other thing I need to say is something around cultural appropriation. So a lot of the plants come from cultures that are foreign to ours. They come, from the Amazon, or they might come from other places, or be used in other cultures. And so I just need to say that the work that I do primarily, and the research paradigm that I work through, is a universalist paradigm. What that says is that, based on evolutionary biology, there are some universal principles that belong to humanity, and they will be found across cultures, wherever it is. And these universal principles get expressed in different ways in different cultures. So the universal principle of the shaman, I'll use that word even though it's very specific to a particular culture, but the universal principle of the healer or shaman appears in many cultures in different ways, and has appeared across centuries. So that's not something that one then just says, well, it belongs to the idea of the healer belongs in one culture, or the idea of ceremony, or the idea of dance, or the idea of using medicinal plants. And we don't have time tonight to go through all that whole history. That's another talk on its own. Then, so the idea then is that the work that I do is to understand and apply universal first principles. So in no way do I attempt to adapt or appropriate or replicate the ceremonies of other cultures or traditions. So I want to believe that the work that I do and the work that I'm presenting and the way that I'm presenting is something that is based on direct access and experience, and subscribes to the idea of universality. So I like to think a little bit as an architect, so for obvious reasons. You get a building, and the building has a structure. And a structure is universal: a column, a beam, a floor, a wall. These things are universal. The way they expressed is different in different cultures, and the way they are constructed is different. And then I think of the ceremonies as the ornament. And I'm not in any way trying to diminish the importance of ceremony, but it's almost the ornamentation that one puts onto the building. So what we're looking for is the structure. What we're looking for are the bare bones, so that we can understand and use, so that we can use it for us today in 2021 in Johannesburg or wherever else you are at the moment. So part of that is just to say that, I personally don't subscribe to any particular belief system around this. I think instead of believing something, it's best to learn through direct experience and knowing. So in that way, I have a very Gnostic approach to the way I interact with knowledge, and the way in which I establish what is the ground for the way I work. But nevertheless, on the way, we kind of, even in the most scientific of environments, we need to have hypotheses. So maybe somewhere along the line, we need to say, well, okay, I hear you about, I don't want to mention anything now because I don't want to upset anybody, but somebody might come and say, I believe X, Y, Z. And I say, well, I don't know that. It's not my direct experience. But as a working hypothesis, let's assume that is the case, and then we test it out. So I just thought that these 4 disclaimers, so to speak, just set the tone for the rest of the talk as well. Right, so I'm going to present this very much from a personal perspective, because it is a lifetime of exploration and inquiry from my part. And it's quite interesting to reflect back, which I did this last week, and see how it weaves together and how it grows together. So way back, in 1978, I'll put that as the start of when I started dancing formally. And I was a dancer and a teacher at Moving Into Dance. And what's important about this period, which is why I've included it here, is that this was a period of technical training, understanding the body, understanding movement, understanding how to create movement, how to deconstruct movement, how to teach movement. So basically a very technical background, which then gives one the language of movement, of dance. So in other words, once you have experienced different types of movement, then you have a wider range of movements instead of what you would have had otherwise, like any training. I mean, you could be for example, playing tennis for fun, but if you went to a tennis pro and they gave you some tips and moves, then your range for playing tennis, for example, would be bigger. So it's simple as that. And then most important is the idea of learning and creating through structured improvisation, because a lot of the work that we did at Moving Into Dance was improvised. Sylvia Glasser, the choreographer, would often be choreographing, but she would also work through improvisation techniques and improvisation sessions to create the movements. So acquiring knowledge through improvisation. Then I stopped dancing there, and for a period I lived in London and did various dance workshops and things there. But the one that really stands out, and I think it's almost like the beginning of this journey for me, was a dance workshop I did with Neil Kaplan, who was a dancer with the Lindsay Kemp dance company in London, so kind of radical alternative dance company. And it was about transformation and dance. And in that workshop, I experienced this vision, this vision that people talk about with the tunnel of light and going down the tunnel and finding the light and then having to come back and all of that. And it was a really strange experience. And later on, when I did some more reading, I realized that it's akin to the near-death experience of the tunnel of light. And it was quite strange that it happened in that workshop in such a real and direct way, but it kind of opened the way for exploring, because suddenly, dance was something different and life was something different. Coming back to South Africa, in this period, 95 to 2001, doing various things with dance, but relevant to this talk was a moment when I kind of became really interested in whirling. And I thought, this is amazing, this idea of dance and movement as a meditation, as a spiritual practice. And I went around trying to find somebody to teach me and somebody to show me. And in the 90s, you were like, if you could find a yoga teacher in Johannesburg, let alone Sufi or somebody else to teach you something like whirling. So what I did is I took the my technical background, and I deconstructed the movement of whirling. So looking at videos, which I bought in Turkey, a whole lot of videos, and looking at how this thing was working. And then through deconstructing the movement, being able to reconstruct it to teach myself the practice of whirling and be able to offer workshops in this whirling. Now, what's really interesting about the whirling, which is a very powerful movement in itself, is that one time I decided that I would go down to Rustlers Valley with a friend of mine called Debbie, and we would experiment, and we would whirl till we dropped, or we would whirl until something happened, something like, wow, amazing would happen. What did happen is that I got to the same physiological barriers and symptoms that I have encountered in ayahuasca ceremonies. So it was quite interesting. It was the same part of my body, the same moment of resistance, the same experience. So, and that was after about an hour or so of wording, which was amazing. So suddenly there was this connection in my body between dance and plant medicine. I hadn't then experienced any plant medicine, so I didn't know. But later on, I put the two together. So then in 2001, back in Rustler's Valley, I met Luis Eduardo Luna and was introduced to ayahuasca. And from 2001 to today, have participated in medicinal plant ceremonies here in Brazil. This is Huasihuasca. This picture is Huasihuasca in Brazil, where Luna lives and works, and have been through countless ayahuasca ceremonies, San Pedro ceremonies, have worked with cacao and have worked with mushrooms. So slowly the paths of dance, of personal experience of plant medicine started to weave and come together. So the talk is called Psychedelics on Dance. So it's not dance on psychedelics. And I thought that an amusing way of putting it is to ask the question, which is ask not what psychedelics can do for dance, but what dance can do for psychedelics. And the two, I'm just going to give you two examples to illustrate the difference. So dance on psychedelics are things like raves, trance parties, etc., where people come together to dance and they take substances. And obviously, there's a whole culture there, there's a whole reason, there's a whole protocol, but that's not the topic of this conversation. The most commonly used drug in this instance is MDMA, which is actually a synthesized drug. So it's not a natural drug. Looking at it in reverse, in other words, the psychedelic comes first and then the dance, is, for example, in Brazil, the Santa Dame Church. They take ayahuasca as a sacrament. So they meet, they take the ayahuasca, and then depending on the ceremony, they'll either be singing or they'll be dancing or they'll be singing and dancing. So they use the dance, the song, to to enhance and navigate the sacrament of the ayahuasca and the spiritual experience. What's interesting here is that the church, although it's kind of Christian, has its own really strange permutation, so to speak, in that it believes in personal gnosis, in other words, personal experience, which is, you know, so it's not about the intermediary, the priest telling you that you are saved or whatever, but it's your own personal experience. An appreciation of nature and our role and our position in nature. And then it has its own strange things. And I just love this totem symbol that they have, which is the Beija Flor, which is a hummingbird. So that's the two sides in terms of like psychedelic, dance on psychedelics or psychedelics on dance. And this is the latter approach. So I'm looking at it, at how dance is going to enhance or the role that it can play in the ceremony or in the psychedelic experience. Quickly, psychedelics is a word that comes from two words, which are soul and to make visible or to reveal, obviously from the Greek, coined by this man called Humphrey Osmond here in 1956. And he used the term as an alternative to hallucinogenic drugs and other things that were being used at the time, because he wanted to make it sound more medicinal and academic. And I just love the fact that, you know, people that looked like your grandfather, yeah, Humphrey Osmond, are so involved in, you know, in these fields and these experiences. It just goes to show you don't judge a book by its cover. And then this quote, "To fathom hell or soar angelic, just take a pinch of psychedelics," was a statement he made to Albert Hoffman at some point, which is interesting. Okay, then just as an aside, there's a more modern word that's come into circulation called an entheogen. And what that literally means is God within. So it's taking the plant or God within. And it's generally used now in when referring to rituals and in religious context. Now, if any of you are sitting there thinking that you have never had a psychedelic or have never had a mind-altering drug, I have news for you. And here are 5 very common mind-altering drugs that every single one of you at some point most probably has partaken. So alcohol, caffeine, coffee, cacao, chocolate, tobacco, I don't know, because I think I've smoked half a cigarette and maybe others have smoked even less, and sugar. And as with everything, you know, it's the excess of the use of these that is the problem. So I'm not going to have a debate about whether sugar is good for you or alcohol is good for you, but just know that you can overdose on coffee and die, literally. I think it's something like 27 liters. I don't know. I was reading a statistic, but you can literally kill yourself by drinking coffee till you die. So anything in excess is going to be detrimental. And then another interesting sort of fact that I came across was something around plants, which we, you know, because this is where the psychedelics come from. There are 800,000 known plant species, and out of these, 120 plants have been identified as hallucinogenic. So it's quite a small percentage. Out of the 800,000 plants, only 3,000 have ever been used by humans as food. So that's also quite a small number. And then today, or commercially, our food comes from roughly about 150 plants. So we really, we have very little knowledge or idea about what is out there and what is, what is useful, what is amazing, or what can be used. And then 12 to 15 plants are the plants that sort of keep us alive. Then I looked at another, I tried to find out how many plants are used as medicine, and I couldn't find a definitive figure, but it ranged also around 3,000 or thereabouts. So roughly about the same number, 3,000 to 5,000 were the numbers of plants that are currently or have been used as medicine. Then, just as an aside, mushrooms or fungi are not classified as plants. They are a different kingdom in themselves. Then, when one looks, by the way, the talk today and my experience is really based on hallucinogenic or psychedelic plants that have a natural origin. I've never tried LSD. I'm not saying that from a moral high ground. I'm just saying I never have. I've tried MDMA, but I've never tried LSD. And I've always stayed with nature, with ayahuasca, with San Pedro, with cacao, whatever. So within the psychedelics, there are two areas roughly, or two effects. The one is where a plant is categorized as a hallucinogenic, and it's a substance that will cause distortion of sensory perception and create vision, and really is the one we kind of think of in inverted commas as tripping. And then the and things like that are ayahuasca, DMT, LSD, stuff like that. Entheogens are drugs that are not hallucinogenics, but that they do have an effect and produce empathy, sympathy, emotional openness, oneness, and communion with others. And here we have the MDMA, which is the artificial drug, but cacao, psilocybin, and things like that. So psychedelics refers to the capacity of a plant to induce altered states of perception, thought, and feeling, which you would not have experienced otherwise. Maybe you would in a dream, or if in some other context, but it takes you out of the ordinary, out of the everyday, into a state, in altered states where you're going to have different kinds of feelings, thoughts, perceptions. So it's mind altering, and it has an effect on our conscious experience. Now, when people take a psychedelic substance, then they will go into an altered state, or they will go into trance, and it's very similar outcomes that one would have with psychoactive plants and dance and other shamanic techniques. So breathing techniques, sensory deprivation, exertion, all sorts of, every single kind of shamanic technique that one may think of that will induce trance tend to go in the same direction, although they don't all have the same effect. But generally speaking, they will produce a parasympathetic dominance in us, which means that we start to let go of control and go into parasympathetic states, which are the road towards sleep and quietening down. They also have a brainwave synchronization, which is dominated by slow wave patterns originating in the limbic system. So the brain produces different wavelengths depending on which state of consciousness we are in, kind of awake consciousness, or if we in a kind of deep meditative consciousness. We're going from one brainwave state to another. And what happens when we go into trance, especially with the psychedelics and with dance, is that slowly the brain waves across the entire brain synchronize and they slow down. So they are really going to that parasympathetic space, and they're also going into the limbic system, which is the seat of the more slower wavelengths, which is the emotional center. The other thing is that there is a right hemisphere dominance, so we are able to start to see patterns, and this becomes even the patterns in visualizations and things like that. But the right hemisphere, which kind of sort of sits there in the background most of the time, comes to the fore. But even more importantly, there is a synchronization between the two hemispheres. So There have been a lot of studies done with ayahuasca, for example, where they've done brain scans and everything to show that the connections, the neural connections lighting up between the two hemispheres increases dramatically, which means that we then access the information from the right hemisphere. The right hemisphere has no language. It has no way of communication other than through expression like art, or it's a different way of communicating and expressing. And this is not part of our, like, you know, what we would normally think as our conscious presence. But with this synchronization is we start to access, and this is where we start to see patterns. We start to have an understanding of patterns in our, when I say patterns, it could be patterns in our life, you know, we can go like, oh, I always do that, or whatever. And we start to get an idea, you know, we start to access that knowledge. Now, what that leads to is it leads to alterations to thinking. We start to think in a different way. And in trance, it changes the sense of time. So we leave this kind of linear chronometric time, and we enter into a different kind of space, which is sometimes feels timeless. We start to feel a difference in our own body image, which is important when it comes to dance. Generally, there's a loss of control. If you've taken a lot of ayahuasca and you want to walk around, you have to do so on all fours. You know that. There's going to be a change in emotional expression, sometimes an intensification and hyper-intensification of emotion, perceptual distortion. There will be a change in meaning and significance. Suddenly the things that, you know, we were holding as important may seem not as important now. And this is how sometimes, you know, the healing happens. You know, the thing that was like, oh my God, this is the worst thing in my life. Suddenly, you know, you look at it and you think, you know, what am I on about? There's a sense of ineffability, being able to do anything, feelings of rejuvenation, and then importantly, a hypersuggestibility, which is why if you are going to do a ceremony, always choose your sitter very carefully. But I think this idea of hypersuggestibility works in our favor if we start to use dance anyway, because then we become our own suggesters. So, you know, why all this? I mean, I was just kind of talking about the psychedelics to introduce that side of things. And so why, you know, why go into the psychedelics? Why go into any of these experiences? And I like to think of it as lifting the veil. It's not a phrase that I've made up myself. It's a phrase that people use, or going through the doors of perception, as Huxley says. But what we're doing is we transcending into altered states through trance, through dance, through psychedelics to lift the veil. So what we are doing is we suspending consciousness of the everyday, and we're shifting into the inner world, or into the subconscious and the inner world. This is Freud's little iceberg, where he talks about, you know, like, you know, there's a whole thing that he talks about the iceberg and how consciousness is the bit that sits on top of the water and the subconscious is the bit that sits under the water. But what we're doing is that in these altered states of consciousness, we are able to explore other dimensions of being. You know, we hold a vision of ourselves in the world, in a particular way, and we, you know, with beliefs and ways of operating. And in this altered state, we are able to explore other ways of being, to see, well, actually, maybe this is not all I am, or maybe this is not all I need to be. So this lifting the veil, I have a couple of examples. So way back, I think it was in 2000 something, I went to France. I did this 10-day retreat. We did 101 shamanic practices over 10 days till we were like so high you couldn't believe it. We were doing sweat lodges and fasting and whirling and you name it. We did it in 10 days. And then I flew to London. And and I love London and Oxford Street and Piccadilly Circus. And I remember going down to Piccadilly Circus and standing on the side of the pavement, and then it felt like the whole world looked like this picture. It was kind of like, here I was, and then there was this thing around me of energy and world and people, and it was like kind of something totally removed. I was no longer in this world. I was looking at it as if it was a movie, but a really strange movie. And I thought of this as stopping the world. So Carlos Castaneda talks about stopping the world, and it's about, and it talks about this as being the first step to seeing. Okay, so what seeing is when you're no longer looking at the world as you know it, but you're looking at it as if everything is new. You're looking at it as if everything has never happened before, and that this world is like an incredible world for you to explore and journey. So this is part of lifting the world. And then another example is, which is more indigenous here, is the San with their healing dance. And they talk about, they're using the dance to enter an altered state of consciousness. And that altered states of consciousness they call first world. And what they say is we live in second world. We live in this world with of the everyday, with whatever is happening. And through the trance dance, we access first world. And the access into first world for the San is through with four techniques. The one is movement, dance. The other one is touch, which is important, and connection. The other one is vision, in other words, having the vision, and the fourth one is sound. And once they've entered the first world, they describe this as a place of hypersensitivity, increased emotional states, etc., which is exactly what we were talking about earlier on with the psychedelics. And here it's, we're entering it with the trance dance. So psychedelics have different effects, and very, very briefly, the effect that the psychedelic will have on you is going to obviously depend on the plant, whether and what it's intended to do. And then a thing called set and setting. In other words, how are you, what's your present state and how you are? And then what is the state in which you're taking this? Is it in a ceremony, or is it in a held place? Is it safe, or whatever it is? The dosage, how much you take, and the intention with which you take it. So these are variants, which is going to give you different effects. So the four effects that I just want to go through today is the perceptual effects, the emotional effects, the cognitive, and the ego. I'm not going to go through in a lot of detail with each one of them, but what I want to do is to highlight the effect, and I want to try and then draw the parallel with dance and how dance can fit into it. So the first one, perceptual effects, is a perceptual intensification. In other words, we become super sensitive. We can hear, we can see, we taste it. We really become heightened aware. At the same time, there can be distortion. In other words, we think see things differently. And remember that this depends on how much you take and what you take. Okay, so it's not that they're all there. There might be illusion, hallucinations. There might be a lot of mental imagery, seeing patterns, seeing images, seeing visions, or whatever, and then elementary or complex hallucination. So, in terms of perceptual effects, I want to come back to this idea that we very often think of ourselves as mind and body. You know, mind is reason and intellect, and body is the feeling and the sense of being. This is kind of this dualistic approach. But when you have taken a hallucinogenic and you start to lose motor coordination, you cannot control the body as you would in an ordinary state of being. So we're so used to controlling and holding, and here you are, your body, you totally are taken over by the plant, and then because your mind is not able to dictate or control the body becomes the vehicle for navigating the experience. In other words, I think the people who have a lot of issues or trauma, or bad experiences, are people who are holding on mentally or feel, they're going to lose control. Whereas if you just say, well, actually, I'm not going to, I let the mind have a break, and I'm going to go into the body, and I will let the body navigate. And this is where the dance and the movement comes in, because it becomes the vehicle through which I can navigate this particular trance experience. And so in the moment, we also need to remember that we're integrating mind with all the body systems anyway. We kind of normally have the body there and thinking of it as, the mind there separately controlling, the control center. But now it becomes integrated, which means that if I allow myself to feel that my mind is my body and my body is my mind, that I can access the innate healing intelligence of the body, and the body knows what to do and how to heal itself. And if you, in that moment, will start to use the movement and start to use the dance, then you will start to access this intelligence. So we're looking at then a whole body knowing. It's not just the brain, or not just the mind, and it's not just the body. And that everything is working together, and it's like an orchestra. And or if you want to think of it a little bit more technical, it's a system. The mind, the emotion, the body, the perception, the senses. Everything is a system that works together. And unfortunately, we tend to separate everything out and focus on one or the other. And what we're doing in these trance states is to say, no. We're going to play the full orchestra, and we're going to use the knowledge and wisdom and experience of the entire system, the whole body. The second one is emotional effects. And here we have, in trance states, intensification of feelings. We have increased access to emotion. We have an increased range of emotions, and sometimes we have states of euphoria. And often we have spontaneous feelings of awe, wonder, bliss, joy, fun, peace, love. What I want to say about this and is a little bit as follows, is that when we look at emotion, we kind of put it out there as something that is happening to us. And we look at it and we say, oh, there is I am sad, or I'm feeling angry, or I'm feeling happy. It's something that that is happening. And so there's a relationship of me and the emotion. And the next thing we do is to try and put a story to that. We kind of say like, I'm happy because, I'm sad because, I'm fearful because. And then what happens is that there are these two paths. We either go towards the emotion and try and deal with it in some way, understand it, uh, stop it, or whatever it is, or we go into the story. Okay, we go like, oh, let's unpack the story, and then we're going to sort everything out. So it's me separate here, and then there's the emotion and the story, and it becomes a cycle. So it can become a cycle. This, I don't like to say it's always is this like this. What we really want to do when we say lifting the veil or looking at an alternative is we want to go behind the scenes, so to speak. So we want to go behind the emotion. We want to go behind the story, not to understand it, not to deal with it, not to engage with it as separate, but to embrace it. And then what happens is that if we're doing this, we going from the ordinary state of being where I am the subject, and then there's an emotion and there's a story, and we go into the non-ordinary state of being where everything starts to just become one. I become the emotion, I become everything, the story, the whole shebang. And this movement to go from one side to the other, we can do through the dance as well. So what we want to do is we want to embrace, we want to have the whole body experience. We want to dissolve the subject and object so that we can encounter the emotion and the stories. So very often, we encounter, well, let me work with an emotion. So we encounter an emotion, and especially if you are in a trance state, or if you have taken a plant and it's intensified, and we either back off or we need to deal with it, or in other words, it's there, it's this big emotion and it's sitting in front of us. Instead, if you go behind the emotion, if you go to the other side, you can ask a different kind of question. So the different kind of question you can ask is, what is this emotion, or what is the story telling me? Because emotions are messages. They're messages from our body. And that's a whole talk in itself. They are telling us something. So instead of, so often we don't want to listen to the message. We get involved with the messenger, like, oh, we have to deal with anger, I have to deal with disgust, I have to deal with euphoria, or whatever it is that I'm dealing with. Instead of going and saying, well, what is the message that this particular emotion or the story is telling me? And when we can do that, then that is when the healing happens. Now, I think that you can't do this rationally. You cannot, I don't think that it's easy to encounter the emotion and the story head on and ask the questions. I think what you need to do is to go into the experience of the whole body experience, which you can do with trance. So if you start to move, for example, and it's a little bit of a cliche, I always say to people, move through your emotion. But if you can start to move, and you can start to feel, and you can start to engage your totality, not just trying to figure it out in your mind or whatever, or in your heart or whatever, but your totality, left brain, right brain, heart, body, senses, smell, touch, movement, the whole lot, then I think you access the wisdom. I think in that moment it's easier to gain an insight, to actually say like, okay, I get it, I'm feeling something now, thank you. So what we're doing then, we start to transmute the emotion, so we consciously access the emotion. We can broaden the range of emotion, and then we can open the space for spontaneity. So through the movement, through the dance, we don't get hung up on the way with one or the other. I want to move on to cognitive effects of the psychedelics. And here, the big one is the change to normal linear thinking. There's also a reduction in the way we can work, our memory, working memory, and our focus and attention, as some of you may know. Past experience comes to the fore as well. But very often we have divergent thinking, where we start to be able to be creative because everything is broadening out and opening up the full possibility. And then we can start to attribute meaning to other stimuli, like music, for example. And I'll come back to that. And then there's the image fusion and seeing images and shifts and transformation and a sense of optimism. So when it comes to music, what I wanted to say is that in trance or under the influence of psychedelics, there's a phenomenon called synesthesia. In other words, where we confuse the senses. In other words, it's like I can taste purple and I can smell cold, and I can, taste, I don't know, whatever, it's everything becomes a little bit mixed up. But through that, if you've got the sounds of music, and music in ceremony is incredibly important, we can start to use the kind of music we use, the type of movement that it induces, and to start to create meaning. In other words, to bring meaning to the experience. So the dance and the music can become a very direct experience. So in other words, if I, it might be things around body image, it might be things around your, qualities or attributes that you actually can move into and feel and incorporate through music. So it's quite a big subject here as well, but let's just move on a little bit. So what happens with cognitive effects now is that our brain is receiving stimuli, okay, from the environment, which it uses to create a reality. But what it's really doing is that it bases all action on past experience. Okay, so there'll be a stimulus that comes into your brain. It will look for a memory, a past experience to be able to judge whether it's good, bad, and what action it should take. And then it predicts the future, and it will make you behave in a particular way. This becomes a problem. Okay, so I'll come back to that. So what your brain is doing, this is not on psychedelics. This is like now in every day. Okay, this is how the neuroscientists are telling us. The brain runs a model of your body in the world, which it only knows through your senses. So in other words, if you touch something, if you move through something, if you smell something, that's the information that comes into your body. Your body then creates a picture of reality. And also, depending on your internal state and the environment around you, it builds a picture of reality, okay? And what we're doing with, so this idea what happens is that if we want to change this, if we want to broaden our perception of reality, if we want to broaden our awareness, if we want to be looking at alternatives, we have to engage in this little game. And I feel that this is where this idea of suggestibility comes in, through dance. Because if I enter into a dance that will start to suggest to my body an alternative experience or a broader experience or a wider view of things, it's feeding into the brain. You can't tell yourself that you can never tell yourself to stop being hungry. Okay, you can stand in front of a mirror and say, stop being hungry, stop being hungry. I understand you're hungry, you need food. It's not going to take hunger away, because it's something so basic and so intrinsic to experience, and it comes from. So the same, you can't stand in front of a mirror and say, be happy, or you know what, be calm. Have you ever told somebody who's having a, like a huge meltdown, calm down, they'll clap you one. So we have to communicate in a different way, and we communicate through the body, through the movement, through the sensual experience of being in the world, to start to deal with changing our perception of reality. So in this way, then what dance gives us is a sense of agency, because it says, I am doing this. I've accomplished this dance. I'm the person, it gives you a sense of self and a sense of your experience of yourself, and that you are able to do something. So you can become the navigator, not the navigated. It's possible to give you congruence between emotion and movement. So we can start to move with the emotion. We can start to move with what we are feeling, and we can start to transmute it. And through kinesthesia, we have a deeper understanding and knowledge. If you are just using language, for example, to understand the world, it's very limiting. If I say to you, that is a tree, then you will, you've got a picture of a tree. But if I take you and I run your hand around the tree, or if I ask you to climb the tree and feel what it's like to climb a tree, or if I ask you to lie under the tree or whatever, then you're going to have a far wider and deeper understanding of what tree means. And this is what kinesthesia gives us. Our movement and our senses gives us a much, much deeper and wider, nuanced experience of the world. Then it's about feeling alive, because movement is life proclaiming, and it's also the way movement is the way we learned in this world. And then movement is a language. It kind of, through the dance, through the movement, we can start to make sense of experience, and we can start to create meaning to our experience through the dance. Lastly, the ego effects. There's blurring of lines between object and subject, there's softening of ego dissolution, dissolution of self and identity, loss of ego, feeling emerging with your surroundings, important one, and feeling at one with the universe. So if we are to learn anything from the San, then it's that I'm not going to talk much about ego, but I wanted to leave you with this thought that the dancer does not seek out the trance state as an end. In other words, we're not going into that space as an end in itself. And likewise, I would also talk about the psychedelic. You don't take it for the sake of taking it. But in what the science says is often we fear these. So the trance state is induced as part of a healing and a growth. That's intention, that fourth aspect of the sand. The experience of transcendence, this moment, is momentarily, though in another sense it is timeless. So once you have experienced, it's always inside of you, but it's not that we live there. It's not that we're always in this space. So the emphasis is not on having the transcendent experience, but on what do you do? What do you do with it? What do you do next? So, and what effect has this experience on your life? So I just thought that that came under the ego really nicely. So why dance? Dance then is healing. As I've spoken about, moving through emotions, insight and understanding. So it's healing. It's transformation. It's about insight. It's recognizing patterns. You know, through the movement, releasing, reforming the paradigm shifts and the energy flow. Sorry, I'm rushing a little bit because I see it's running a lot of time. So dance can alter consciousness through a variety of mechanisms, but such as rhythmic stimulation. But what's really interesting, that a study was made on dancers, and what they found is that serotonin and opioid levels in the brain of dancers is really high. It's similar to people who have taken psychoactive drugs. So it's interesting that this association of serotonin and the opiate system, which you know is part of altered states of consciousness, is found in dance and in psychedelics. There's, you know, they're very, very similar things happening in the brain. Of course, it's very different how we get there. Oops, sorry. And then, so why dance? You know, and I think for me, in terms of psychedelics on dance, is to say that dance in the psychedelic experience is used to navigate the experience. In other words, I don't become this passive receiver of experience. You know, oh, it's happening to me. Oh, look what ayahuasca does to me. Oh, look what San Pedro does to me. Oh, you know, woe is me. And, you know, and like I'm the victim or the passive receiver of this experience. That this is the shamanic way, by the way. So the shamanic way is to navigate. Is yes, all of this is happening. All the things we've spoken about in terms of what's happening to the mind, the body, the ego, but I navigate it. And I can, and because the mind is a little bit like jelly, you know, it's a bit incoherent, it's a little bit wobbly, I can use the body. And I know this from experience, that it's a really powerful way of navigating through some really difficult moments in ceremony. And then dance can be used to mitigate and transmute emotions. These intense emotional moments that come up is what you do with it. And if you can use the movement and dance, you can embrace, you can encounter, you can move through. And then dance accesses the subconscious. If we're thinking that we can't rationalize, we can't use the rational mind in this moment, but we can enter the space of the subconscious with the dance, and we can allow the unfolding to happen in the experience. So very briefly, there are moments. So the dance is important in some ways, in that there is energy in postures and movements. So when I'm talking about dance here, you must also know that I'm coming from an extremely technical background. I'm not saying like prance around like a silly billy. I'm really thinking of very specific ways of using dance. So because there's energy in the dance and movement, and this I just there's so many examples, but I wanted to show you this one, which is Magical Passes, simply because Carlos Castaneda did have both the experience of the psychedelics or the hallucinogenic drugs, and then created this whole system of movement and power poses and things to use. And then I wanted to bring you to an example in South Africa through moving into dance and my own experience. Sylvia Glasser created this piece called Transformations, using her knowledge that she gained through research, doing her anthropology degree on the Sand People. And very simply, she took movements. I mean, the work's a lot more complex than this, but one aspect of the work is that she took movements from rock art. So if you look at this line of figures and the rock art, and then you look at the dances and the postures that they have, you will see, you'll recognize them. So at some point way back, Sylvia said to me, please come and help me. You know, she was mounting this work at the Wits Theatre. She says, please come and help me, and I want you just to direct all the stage sets, because there's very particular times when they come down and they go up, and you know, we can't get this wrong. And so that was my job. But what was amazing is that these dancers would go on stage, they would do these sequences, and they would come off literally in trance. They would be lying on the floor, they would have to be resuscitated, they would have to be kind of like calmed down, simply through the power of these postures. And from my own experience, I've tried them and they work. So it's quite interesting, that the energy of posture and movement. So my own experience of bringing the two together. This, I have brought ayahuasca and dance together. This picture here on the left is at Wasiwasca, where I was part of two-week workshops in Brazil over 2 consecutive years, where basically I would do biodanza for the group in the afternoon before we would do this ayahuasca ceremony. And what happened is that it really opened the physical aspect of the ceremony. There would be lots of dancing and movement and animation, not during the ceremony, but afterwards, awakened by the dance. So it really helped and broadened the experience. They were really powerful experiences to combine the dance with the ayahuasca. The man with the red is Luna, and the man whose head is facing backwards is Dennis McKenna. Then there was a moment when we went to the Amazon as well, and we did a whole workshop with ayahuasca and art. So it's not just dance, so you can have ayahuasca and art. Very similar. And these are some drawings that I did, one after an ayahuasca session, one after a San Pedro session. But the experience in the Amazon for me that was really striking on that particular workshop was having taken ayahuasca, going outside to dance and move, but to actually feel how I was transforming into, I want to say a panther, but it was a tiger, a panther, it was a large cat. And how the movements, you know, how I became this cat, how I was dancing, but more importantly, the value of that experience, which was to feel and embody the qualities of the big cat. So really to take that on board and just like, okay, this is what it feels like. This is how I can go forward feeling like a powerful cat. And this is a drawing which is from a cave art, and this whole process is about, it's called therianthropy. Then San Pedro and dance. We've held a couple of workshops out, retreats out in Magaliesburg, where we used San Pedro and dance. And there the San Pedro was used very particularly in terms of the rhythm of the day and the cycle of the day. So it was really, the San Pedro is a very lovely plant to connect with nature. And so the cycles of nature and nature. And the one thing was to align to the cycles of nature with the fire, with greeting the dawn, and then the sunset, and really timing the entire dance San Pedro experience to that. And the other one was to connect with nature. So I would take people, give them San Pedro, then we would go up into this mountain, not all the way to the top, but somewhere up the mountain. We would then dance there using nature. So using the wind, the sounds of the winds, the sounds of the insects, the sounds of the soil, the rocks, whatever, to create the dances. Come back, do a little bit of meditation, and then more dancing. So really connecting with nature and San Pedro. So like taking the psychedelic, extending it, the experience through the dance to connect with nature. And in a way then to have a nature metamorphosis. So connecting with inner nature and to dance with our outer nature. And then lastly, I've done quite a few sessions with cacao. Basically, using the cacao to enter into those empathetic and open states of heart and sensitivity through the dance. And that sort of used the cacao. And then just I wanted to end off with looking at some of the experimentation that I've been working with. I said to you that actually dance, it's not just dancing around, hopping around, doing your own thing in particular. And I know this is a topic that can be a little bit controversial, but I'm starting to believe that there is a technique to conscious dance. And I think if one recognizes that, one can actually enrich the experience. So the one is the whirling, which I mentioned to you before, which is deconstructing this whirling. So we don't wear skirts and hats and everything. I've deconstructed it down to basic principles and going into that experience of being able to stop the world through movement. So if for me, and I don't know if it's for other people as well, but if I am whirling, I find an absolute stillness in the middle of that turning motion, where my body is, or my whole being is connected to absolute peace and stillness, but everything else is whirling around at like crazy. So that's one of the techniques. The other one is shaking. And shaking comes from a lot of traditions, but I like these shakers on the Bushman's feet, because you go like chak, 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 chak. Shaking is about losing control of the movement totally. So I love watching people, do the shaking, because it tells you immediately exactly how much they're holding on and how much they're willing to let go, just by watching them shake. And so it's a total, so it's like really letting go and being able to then transcend through the shaking. The primordial movements that I've been experimenting with are really to follow the movement patterns of our own evolution through the species, but also our own evolution as a human being. And there are 4 stages. These are the 3 first. So it's kind of like the fish or aquatic stage, the reptilian stage, the primate stage, and then the primate, and then standing up. So really doing work with this. And then lastly, I don't know how to show this, but deep tissue movement, which is movements that are in dance that is specifically aimed at going right deep into the body. So not using the superficial muscles or the muscles we normally use for dance and movement, but to really access some really deep spaces. Very, very powerful work. It releases amazing energy and experience. So that's it. And now with my friend Gary, who's I think still on this call, we initiated our first dance on mushroom and dance, which was amazing. And this is the area in which at the moment I am taking the work and wanting to explore. So that's it. And then I just thought I'd leave you with a quote from Richard Feynman, because I'm sitting here going, oh, there's a technique to conscious dance, and you should do this, and you should move there, and all this kind of stuff. And then, you know, so many people go like, oh, I just want to dance. So what about the experience? Oh, it's going to ruin it for me. And I love this because Richard Feynman, you know, in answer to an artist, says that, you know, science knowledge or knowing about something adds to the excitement and the mystery and the awe. You know, it just adds. If you understand something or you learn about it, it adds. It can't be. It doesn't subtract from the experience. And that's it for now. Thank you.